937 AD. Somewhere in northern England, historians still argue exactly where, the largest armies ever assembled in Dark Age Britain faced each other across a field that would decide everything. King Athelstan of England watched from his position as a coalition gathered that should have destroyed him. Vikings from Dublin, Scots from the north, Britons from Strathclyde. Perhaps 40,000 warriors total, united by one goal: break English power and carve up Athelstan's kingdom like a feast. The numbers were brutal. Athelstan commanded perhaps 20,000 men. The coalition facing him, 25,000, maybe more. 5 kings led the enemy, experienced warlords, proven commanders, men who'd spent lifetimes in warfare. Against them stood Alfred the Great's grandson, facing the greatest test of his reign. By sunset, one side would be destroyed. 5 kings would meet their fate. Thousands of warriors would never see home again. And the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle would record words that echo through a millennium. Never was there more slaughter on this island. But which side would win? Could Athelstan's outnumbered army survive? Or would England be carved up by the coalition that surrounded it? This is the Battle of Brunanburh, the largest, bloodiest, most decisive battle fought in Britain between the Roman withdrawal and the Norman conquest. The battle that decided whether England would survive as a nation or vanish from history. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're uncovering the greatest forgotten battle in British history, a fight where more men died than at Hastings, where the fate of England hung by a thread, and where one king's courage against impossible odds changed everything. Because Brunanburh wasn't just about tactics or numbers. It was about whether England would survive as a nation or be carved up by Vikings and Scots who believed Athelstan's power could be broken. But before we get to that blood-soaked field, before we watch 5 kings fall and 10,000 men die, we need to understand how England reached this crisis. Because without knowing what Athelstan had built and why so many wanted to destroy it, you can't appreciate what was at stake when these armies finally collided. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten history, make sure you're subscribed. We uncover the battles that shaped Britain, but vanished from memory. Don't miss them. Let's go back to 924, when Athelstan became King of Wessex and Mercia at age 29. He inherited a powerful but incomplete realm. His grandfather, Alfred the Great, had saved Wessex from Viking conquest. His father, Edward the Elder, had reconquered the Midlands, pushing back Danish settlers and establishing English control over Mercia and East Anglia. But the north, York and Northumbria, remained under Viking rule. England was still divided, still vulnerable, still incomplete. Athelstan was different from his predecessors. Alfred had been a survivor, fighting from swamps to save his kingdom. Edward had been a consolidator, methodically reconquering lost territory. But Athelstan was a conqueror, ambitious and ruthless, determined to finish what his family had started. He wanted what no English king had achieved since Roman times: rule over all of England. In 927, Athelstan made his move. The Viking king of York, Sitric, died suddenly. His kingdom fell into disputed succession. Athelstan marched north with an army before anyone could consolidate power. He took York without significant fighting, forcing Viking nobles to flee or submit. For the first time in 2 centuries, one king ruled from the English Channel to the Scottish border. The title Athelstan claimed was revolutionary. Rex Anglorum, King of the English. Not King of Wessex, not King of the Anglo-Saxons, King of the English. One nation, one people, one crown. It was an idea that threatened everyone who'd grown comfortable with a divided Britain. Think about what this meant for a moment. For nearly 2 centuries, England had been a patchwork. Viking jarls ruled York. Danish settlers controlled East Anglia. Various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms competed for supremacy. Wales remained independent. Scotland watched from the north. It was profitable chaos, raiding, tribute, constantly shifting alliances where clever rulers could play different powers against each other. Athelstan's unified England threatened to end all of it. Constantine II, King of Scotland, had allied with English kings against Vikings for decades. Now suddenly, a unified English kingdom sat on his southern border, stronger than any Scottish force could match. The balance of power that had protected Scottish independence for generations had shifted catastrophically against him. Olaf Guthfrithson, Viking King of Dublin, had family claims to York. His kinsmen had ruled there for generations, building trade networks and accumulating wealth. Athelstan's conquest cut him off from his English inheritance. The wealthy city that should have been his Viking kingdom was now English territory, lost to his family forever, unless he could take it back by force. Owen I of Strathclyde, ruling the Britons in what's now southern Scotland and northern England, found himself squeezed between 2 expanding powers. His kingdom's independence relied on English-Scottish division, keeping both neighbours weak. A unified England, growing more powerful by the year, threatened everything his people had built. These 3 kings, Constantine, Olaf, and Owen, had a common interest: break Athelstan's power before it became unbreakable. They formed a coalition in 937, probably coordinating through winter 936 to 937. The plan was straightforward but ambitious. Invade England from multiple directions simultaneously, force Athelstan to divide his army, and destroy him before he could concentrate his forces for a decisive battle. Olaf brought a fleet from Dublin, perhaps 50 to 60 ships carrying 4,000 to 5,000 Vikings. These weren't raiders looking for quick plunder. They were professional warriors, many with Irish experience, led by a king who'd been fighting since childhood. Contemporary Irish annals describe Olaf as ambitious and ruthless, a worthy opponent for any king in Britain. His Vikings landed somewhere on the northwest English coast, probably the Wirral or Lancashire, and began marching inland, burning and looting to draw Athelstan north. Constantine brought the Scottish army south, infantry mostly, hardy warriors used to rough terrain and brutal combat. Numbers are uncertain because Scottish records from this period are scarce, but perhaps 6,000 to 8,000 men marched under Constantine's banners. With them came Owen's Strathclyde Britons, adding another 3,000 to 4,000 warriors. The coalition was real, substantial, and deadly serious about destroying Athelstan's unified England. Athelstan's response was methodical and impressive. He summoned the Fyrd, the Anglo-Saxon militia system, where landholders owed military service to the crown. From Wessex in the south came experienced warriors who'd fought Vikings for decades, men whose grandfathers had stood with Alfred at Edington. From Mercia came troops who remembered their own wars against Danish settlers, battles their fathers had won to keep Mercia English. From East Anglia and beyond, England's fighting men answered their king's call. By late summer, 937, Athelstan had assembled perhaps 15 to 20,000 warriors. Not as many as the coalition facing him, but these were men fighting for their homes rather than conquest. They were better equipped than their enemies. Anglo-Saxon England's economy was stronger, its metalworking more advanced. English warriors wore mail armour that most Scottish infantry lacked. English weapons were forged in workshops that had been perfecting their craft for generations. And crucially, they fought under unified command, while the coalition was 3 allied armies that had never trained together. The English army marched north to meet the invasion, and somewhere, historians still debate exactly where, the two forces met near a place called Brunanburh. The location is one of history's enduring mysteries. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle mentions Brunanburh, but gives no geographic details that help modern historians pinpoint it. Medieval sources offer contradictory clues. Modern historians have proposed dozens of locations: Bromburgh on the Wirral Peninsula, Burns Walk in Scotland, various sites in Lancashire and Yorkshire. Archaeological evidence remains frustratingly elusive despite searches. We know the battle happened. We know it was massive. We just don't know exactly where. What we do know is what happened when these armies collided. The Anglo-Saxon poem, The Battle of Brunanburh, composed shortly after the battle, one of the finest war poems in Old English literature, provides vivid details that historians have analysed for centuries. The fighting began at dawn. English forces attacked the coalition camp in the early morning light, catching many warriors still preparing for the day's battle. The assault was brutal and immediate. English infantry, formed in the shield wall formations that had won battles from Alfred's time onward, advanced toward Viking and Scottish positions. The poem describes the field of battle grew dark with the blood of warriors. This wasn't tentative skirmishing or cautious maneuvering. This was full-scale slaughter from the opening moments, shield wall crashing against shield wall with the force of thousands of men pushing forward. Shield wall warfare was intimate brutality, unlike anything modern combat offers. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping in formations called the wall or the shieldberg. You fought men you could see clearly, smell, hear breathing. Spears thrust over shield rims, seeking gaps in enemy defenses. Axes swung at shields trying to splinter wood and break formations. Swords stabbed through openings when they appeared. Men in the front ranks died quickly or killed quickly. There was no middle ground in shield wall combat. Those behind pushed forward, stepping over bodies of friends and enemies, maintaining the pressure that decided medieval battles. The coalition forces had numbers and experienced warriors. Vikings knew shield wall combat intimately. They'd fought this way for generations across Europe, from Ireland to Constantinople. Scottish warriors were hardy fighters, tough as the brutal land they came from, experienced in raiding and border warfare. Strathclyde Britons brought their own warrior traditions, but they lacked the unified command that made Athelstan's forces effective. 3 allied armies fought as separate contingents, each with their own commanders, their own objectives, their own pride preventing the coordination that wins battles. The fighting continued through the morning into afternoon. Neither side broke. English warriors pushed forward yard by yard. Coalition forces held their ground desperately. Men died by the hundreds on both sides as the hours ground on. The noise would have been overwhelming. Thousands of weapons striking shields and armor, men screaming orders that were immediately lost in the chaos, wounded warriors crying out, the dull thunder of massed combat that survivors remembered with nightmares for the rest of their lives. Contemporary sources describe the battlefield becoming difficult to traverse as bodies piled up. Warriors had to step over corpses to advance. Blood made the ground slippery. The smell must have been overwhelming. Blood, sweat, voided bowels of dying men. The particular stench of mass combat that veterans recognized instantly. This was warfare at its most primitive and brutal, decided by which side could endure more punishment without breaking. Then sometime in the afternoon, sources disagree on the exact timing. The coalition line cracked. The poem doesn't specify exactly what happened, and historians debate the turning point. Perhaps English pressure finally overwhelmed a section of the Viking shield wall. Perhaps coalition coordination collapsed as casualties mounted and commanders were killed. Perhaps exhaustion after hours of fighting simply broke the will of warriors who'd been fighting since dawn. But the shield walls that had held all day suddenly gave way. When medieval shield walls broke, organized slaughter followed. Warriors who'd fought as disciplined units became individuals running for their lives. English forces pursued with the methodical brutality that characterized Anglo-Saxon warfare when they had enemies at their mercy. Men who turned to run were cut down from behind. Those who tried to surrender found that quarter was rarely given in battles this large and this bitter. The pursuit continued for miles as coalition forces fled toward their camps, their ships, anywhere that might offer safety. The casualties among coalition leaders were catastrophic and unprecedented. 5 kings died that day. The exact identity of all 5 is debated by historians because sources unclear, but certainly included several Viking rulers allied with Olaf and possibly Scottish sub-kings who ruled under Constantine's overlordship. 7 Norse jarls, the Viking nobility, experienced warlords who commanded their own ships and warriors, fell in the fighting. Constantine II's own son was killed, though sources disagree on whether he died in battle or shortly after from wounds. The coalition lost its entire leadership class in a single afternoon of slaughter. Olaf Guthfrithson survived, but barely. The poem describes him fleeing to his ships with a small force, escaping across the Irish Sea back to Dublin with remnants of his shattered army. He'd arrived with perhaps 4,000 to 5,000 warriors in scores of ships. He left with a fraction of that number, abandoning equipment, treasure, and the bodies of thousands of his men. His fleet, which had seemed so threatening when it arrived on England's coast, limped home shattered. Constantine II also escaped, retreating north with the remnants of the Scottish army. But his son was dead, his military power broken, and his attempt to check English expansion had failed catastrophically. he would never again challenge England militarily. Within 6 years, broken by the disaster, he abdicated the Scottish throne and became a monk at the monastery of St. Andrews, perhaps seeking redemption for the thousands he'd led to death at Brunanburh. The English victory was total, but it came at a price that Athelstan felt deeply. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that 2 of Athelstan's own cousins died in the battle, Alfwine and Ethelwine, young noblemen fighting in the shield wall alongside common warriors rather than commanding from safety. English casualties were heavy. Modern historians' estimates suggest perhaps 3,000 to 4,000 English dead, roughly 20% of Athelstan's army. These weren't light losses, but compared to coalition casualties, possibly 7,000 to 10,000 dead, the English had won decisively. The Anglo-Saxon poem captures the scale with a haunting imagery that still moves readers today. The field of slaughter grew dark with the blood of warriors from the time when the sun, that glorious luminary, the bright candle of God, of the Lord eternal, moved over the earth in the hours of morning until that noble creation sank to its setting. From sunrise to sunset, all day men died in a field whose exact location we've lost to history. The poem describes scavenging birds, ravens, eagles, kites, gathering to feast on corpses. A standard medieval image, but particularly vivid here, given the scale of death. It speaks of ships loaded with survivors fleeing across deep water back to Dublin. It celebrates English victory while acknowledging the terrible cost. Never before in this island, as the books of old historians tell us, was there greater slaughter of an army by the sword. The strategic consequences were immediate and permanent. Athelstan's unified England survived the greatest test it had faced. The Viking threat from Dublin was broken for a generation. Olaf's defeat was so complete that he couldn't mount another serious invasion, despite ruling a powerful kingdom. Scottish expansion southward ended permanently. The idea of England as a single kingdom, which had seemed fragile before Brunanburh, became established fact that no one could seriously challenge. But perhaps more important than the immediate military results was what Brunanburh meant psychologically for the development of English identity. For the first time, warriors from across England, Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, had fought together as Englishmen, not as separate kingdoms reluctantly allied for temporary advantage. The poem emphasizes this unity repeatedly, celebrating West Saxons and Mercians, fighting side by side, sharing glory and casualties equally. A national identity was being forged in blood on that battlefield. Athelstan himself became England's legendary warrior king. His reign until his death in 939 was secure beyond question. Foreign kings sent embassies seeking his favor. European rulers married their daughters to nobles at his court. He was Rex Anglorum, in fact, as well as title. England was real, unified, powerful. The dream Alfred had fought for in the swamps had become reality under his grandson. Yet, here's the puzzle that haunts Brunanburh and makes this video necessary. How did the largest, bloodiest, most decisive battle of the English Dark Ages become forgotten? How does a fight involving 40,000 warriors, killing perhaps 10,000 men, deciding England's fate for centuries, simply vanish from popular memory while lesser battles remain famous? Part of the answer is 1066 and what followed. The Norman conquest overshadowed everything that came before in English historical consciousness. When William defeated Harold at Hastings, Norman historians rewrote English history to emphasize their own legitimacy and minimize Anglo-Saxon achievements. Anglo-Saxon military victories became inconvenient reminders that Englishmen had once been formidable warriors who'd built a powerful kingdom. Brunanburh, which demonstrated English martial prowess so dramatically, faded from Norman histories. Part is the location mystery. Hastings has a battlefield you can visit with markers and monuments. Waterloo has museums. Agincourt has commemoration sites. Brunanburh, we argue about which county it happened in, let alone the specific field. Without a physical site to anchor memory, to allow pilgrimages and commemorations, the battle became abstract, eventually mythical, finally forgotten except by specialists. Part is simply the passage of time and how history is taught. 1066 is an easy date that every British schoolchild learns. 937 feels ancient, disconnected from later English history that leads to the present. Most people can't name kings between Alfred and William the Conqueror. Athelstan, despite being arguably England's greatest Anglo-Saxon warrior king, remains obscure outside academic circles. 5 kings dead, 7 jarls fallen, 10,000 warriors who never went home, all in one day, all deciding whether England would survive as a nation or be carved up by enemies. This is Brunanburh, the battle that united England, the victory that saved a nation, the triumph that deserves to be remembered. If this is the kind of history that makes you proud to be British, the forgotten victories, the impossible triumphs, the moments when English courage changed the world, then you know what to do. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told. Thank you for watching Britain's history. The stories that mattered, told the way they deserved.